Today's video is a little bit different from previous ones I've done before when it's MCQ related. Before I would give you answers and so forth and kind of like run you through the MCQ questions. But today I wanted to roll it back actually to the foundations here regarding reading comprehension, because what is the MCQ exam but just reading comprehension basically? If you don't have that down, it becomes way more difficult to answer because you have just not been exposed to enough texts or not used to reading altogether, at least at an effective level. So nothing new here in terms of tips or information, but I want to share a little bit of a mindset and perspective on how to build reading comprehension so that when you do MCQ or even like research papers and so forth, you won't have any troubles with that because you've exposed yourself to perhaps better practices regarding reading here. So understanding's half the battle. Let's go ahead and get started here. The first point I want to make with you is just reading things that may interest you here. If you look at this picture that I've presented here in terms of the presentation, it is kind of paradoxy, is kind of symbolic in terms of what's presented in juxtapositions with each other, and images like this back when I was in my early years of college really interested me because I was thinking to myself, wait, this has to have a bigger message to it, or if there is a bigger message to it, what is it? And I started realizing that this was something that was part of the surrealist movement, or just surrealism in general, the sort of like, makes you think kind of awkward, weird type situation, readings and writings and paintings as well. And as I pursued it more, surrealism tied itself with existentialism and this pursuit of meaning of life. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting, being able to figure out what the meaning of life is, or at least getting a better idea and grasp of life, right, through the constant questioning of it. And the more I looked into that, I looked at a lot of authors who were existentialists or slightly surrealists in their own ways, right, like Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, or Kafka. These people were, you know, constantly questioning what life meant or society or whatever, and I thought that was super interesting because for the most part, no one really did that, at least for my high school readings. Everything was kind of like, this is the way to go, and this is how the system works altogether. And the more I followed their works, the more I found other connections as well to psychology, because a lot of their works dealt with narrators or characters who were very troubled in how they perceived the world around them, people who were locked in their psyches and so forth. And I went into, again, psychologists like Carl Jung or Sigmund Freud, and I started thinking about, okay, well, maybe we can better understand our existence if we better understand ourselves in the process here. And so I started doing a lot of readings on these particular authors and just seeing how their theories worked, not even just novels anymore, but theories. Like I did my own research in this case of looking online, reading articles and so forth, just figuring out a better grasp of what it means to be a psychologist. But that wasn't assigned to me. None of that was assigned. I simply looked down this rabbit hole of things that interest me in general here. And that's kind of like why I reached into some weird places for reading, but I enjoyed every bit of it. And I read, you know, actively and genuinely as I was doing so. So that being said, along with your active reading here, you want to make sure that you're actively reading it in a physical level. Dramatize your reading here. If you've ever watched movies, if you've ever seen plays and so forth, you know these characters put a lot of passion and heart and character into what they're saying, but we often don't do that. And I look in classrooms often, and I hate it when people are being asked to read when they really haven't been trained to read in the first place. You have a lot of people who read in that sort of monotone, Chapter 1, Western civilization. You know what I mean? Like, it's really humdrum, and I get it. Some of the readings are boring, but you gotta put a little bit more energy into it, a little bit more pizzazz, but sadly, people haven't been trained to do so. And you might look back to that movie clip I showed you from Whiplash, where Fletcher basically beats the shit out of his entire band of players. But the thing is, Fletcher's lines are written with emotion, and that's the point, right? The character, the actor sees that and he thinks to himself, well, I'm going to read it in a way that I perceive as the most accurate or genuine or whatever, right? Effective. And the script looks something like this for one of the scenes. There's no exact maybe emotion that he should be reading his piece. It gives some stage directions into how people are reacting and so forth to give context, but everything else is up to one's own interpretation and impression. And I would even encourage you to do a little bit more of this here, where as you're reading things like dialogue from plays or scripts, whatever, act out, you know what I mean? You have a lot of time right now in your own sort of like safety of your room, whatever. Use this opportunity to perhaps start reading scripts in a way with a voice, with a tone, to better understand how to actually embody a character. That does a lot to understand narrators and perspectives being offered within any sort of reading here, because your brain's starting to pick up, oh, these things are coming together into this type of speaker. I'm not asking you to be, dramatizing a whole like particular skit in your own room necessarily, right? But the thing is, at least meet halfway. Try to read it with a little bit more passion, right? And build it up. I promise you, it starts adding up. I took theater in high school and also a little bit in college, and I read a lot out loud to myself as well, which gives me a better understanding of how characters really are as I investigated them, both in my brain, but also on the research of the reading itself and so forth here. Testing your limits is super important whenever you're doing any reading comprehension whatsoever, because too many times we read really easy stuff, right? Or as you're reading the hard stuff, we skim by it really quickly here, and that doesn't do you any justice whatsoever. You gotta understand, even on the small paragraph level like the one I'm giving you, or on the AP exam one, really it's just like 3 or 4 dense paragraphs. What does it really mean? And the more you read difficult text, the more comfortable you get, and the more used to you get to deciphering, reading line by line, and processing everything here. Because if you keep reading easy works, all you're doing is lifting basic weights, and basic weights do you basic justice. You gotta read the hard stuff. You gotta lift a Grapes of Wrath in one hand and a Katarina in one hand, and start building up your strengths to be able to read more difficult works in the future. Because feasibly, does it even make sense that if you're reading Clifford the Big Red Dog your whole life, you're able to read something that's college level or whatever? Obviously not. So you're going to make sure that you're reading stuff at least your reading level, and then pushing that envelope more and more in your life. Self-found vocab. You want to make sure you're looking at vocab yourself. I provide you some on a weekly basis. We quiz and so forth. You learn some, you forget some. But the thing is, you want to make sure you're also finding out vocab on your own, things that pertain to you, or things that you're interested in, or things that, just stand out in a reading, so you have a better grasp of the English language and foundations altogether. Like, AP exam is going to throw a lot of weird words at you, and yeah, in a short time you're not going to know all of them or process all of them, and you have to use context clues and all that. But wouldn't it have been nice if you knew these words, for example, right? Hegemony, cartographic, conversant. It would have been nice to know them, but the thing is, that's the thing. You have to have done that on your own autonomy, your own time. No one's going to kind of just throw out vocab at you randomly, nor are you going to process it on your own. You have to want to know vocab on every occasion here. Here's the big secret of why we give chapter books in high school. It's not just random readings. It's more about learning how to recap. Because if you think about these books here, they all have chapters to them. And with every chapter has a very condensed set of understandings and morals and points and everything. And by the end of it, our biggest question is just, hey, what did you number from that? And what do you understand from that? And that was the entire point of these chapter books here. It was more so, yeah, the morals and the themes and everything are important too. But it's also to test and give you the skills of comprehension chapter to chapter. How does 17 relate to 18? How does 18 bridges to 19? And so forth and so on. So in this case, even on a textbook level or on an article level with its own sections and paragraphs and so forth, your challenge in getting stronger reading comprehension is just seeing the links of how you got to one place to another and being able to recall as much as you can from one paragraph to another. Ask as many questions as you can. You gotta make sure you ask questions for any readings here, just because it helps give you a purpose, but at the same time, it helps you kind of be more engaged with the text, right? There's more than meets the eye. There has to be more than just recalling information here. Author has to have some bigger meaning or some bigger point for us to decipher here. I give you Give It Up by Franz Kafka because it's super short in terms of the reading itself. It's literally just one paragraph here with a little bit of dialogue in between, but as you read this, and as you may have finished reading here, I already have some questions of myself. For example, why is a policeman in the story so resilient to giving information? Why is he so arrogant to this narrator? Who is this narrator? How do they kind of interpret the situation? You know what I mean? I have so many thoughts in mind, and the more I kind of like work myself back and forth in this paragraph, do I come with a more complex understanding? And do I answer the questions that I initially set from the beginning to answer in this case here? And you want to be able to answer your own questions, not someone's arbitrary answers or questions, because it's not your own curiosity. Analyze everything. I give you a bunch of short films in class for entertainment value, sure, to make a point, sure, but at the same time, to train your eyes to analyze things, right? The small choices, the nuances, the jargon, the whatever that the director has done so that in the connection, when you look at an author, you're doing the same thing. So in this case, for anything you ever observe in your life, notice the smaller details. They have a bigger point to them, and they usually do relate with the overall point or theme or whatever the author has intended in their work here. I've read a lot of manga in my life, and manga is like on the surface level supposed to be for entertainment value, but the more I read it, the more I thought to myself, there has to be more. There's no way this is just, a general story. It seemed like the author's making an argument, at least in this case here, if you look at these two panels, about equality, about human life, about death, about maybe morals and ethics and so forth. And in this case, I'm thinking like, that seems to be it. That this author is making these very particular choices and symbols and so forth to make me think about what are my views regarding human life or death or equality and so forth. Analyze everything, there's a lot more packed than meets the eye. This is a basic one. Keep a routine, read with purpose. Without school right now, or if you're in the summer, for example, it's super hard to develop your reading comprehension skills because you're not forced to, or you're not pushed to do so. But you gotta make sure you're reading a little bit on a daily basis and with a purpose, right? I'm learning this, for example. I'm practicing this, for example. I'm trying to train my eyes for this particular purpose. Everything has to have a purpose in reading. Even if I give you kind of like a weird, arbitrary reading, you're thinking like, what's the purpose of this one? Form one, you know what I mean? Your challenge as an assignment, besides me telling you what to do, is also figuring out a purpose for the reading here. You intrinsically, which means on your own, on a self-desire, what do you want to get out of this particular piece? This is a hard one, and this is, I think, my last tip I want to give you here. Write like an author. It doesn't deal with reading comprehension per se, but it does so much. If you write like an author, you start being very nitpicky about your own writing, and you start being really nitpicky about writing in general. And when you look at other people's writing, you start to appreciate more of how they got there and how they're able to make the choices that they did. Like, I go back to Whiplash again, because I think it's like a movie you guys remember. We keep memeing about, are you rushing or are you dragging, right? But it's actually a little bit more complex than you think, because if you ever watched a movie, Fletcher on the right, the, belligerent and berating, composer here, or the guy who's in charge of this band here, he's like that because he hates how Hollywood has become and how art has changed into money and profits versus art for art's sake. He hates this sort of devaluing of people willing to do whatever it takes to rise up, but not willing to put everything into a particular craft or to, have some sort of pride and ownership over your work. And that's the thing where, even though Fletcher's crazy, don't get me wrong, he has a good point. A lot of us don't do that, especially with our writing here. And writing is super difficult because this is the classic classroom environment, that we are afraid of our works being scrutinized, and we're so afraid of being vulnerable to another person reading our work that we often claim, that didn't try, you can't hurt me. But listen, you have to learn how to get hurt too, especially with writing, because you cannot live this lie that your writing is perfect, nor is it ideal. You have to look at all the feedbacks you're given, and you have to be able to give yourself honest feedback. Is this really your best work? And if it isn't, maybe the person on the other side is right, that you are turning in garbage. And if you're proud turning in garbage, then that is something you have to come to terms with. And that's a hard message and a hard pill to swallow, but my point really is just this. Authors, or just writers in general, do not accept that. You have to turn in your best work, and you had to admit that was your best work at the time being. You can always improve, but you have to admit where you are right now. Stop being anonymous. Don't feel like you are writing to an empty reader, to nobody, for just points. You have to write as if you have an audience. You have to write, even if it's just one person, write as if you're giving something that is more personal, more passionate, more opinionated, something that means more of you, someone who's listening, because only through that will you become a better writer, and in turn, a better reader. So with all this in mind, I end with this last thought regarding MCQs. What is the MCQ really testing? Testing reading comprehension. How do you build reading comprehension? You really have to get active with reading. But unless you do that on your own, and unless you do a lot of it in terms of skill building and foundation building, you will have a hard time with MCQs. So the moral of the story really is this: you gotta read more. You gotta kind of, not even just books and novels, but even on a smaller level of small paragraphs and scripts, and even things like comic strips and all that, to put a little bit more thought into it and translating that into more arbitrary and boring stuff like the AP exam. But once you make that first step, the second step comes way easier.